1925, 3rd of May.
And you've spent all your life in Surry Hills?
Yes.
When did your family come to Surry Hills? Would you like to tell me a little bit about your family?
Which end of it you want?
The whole lot.
Dad immigrated in 1871 to Sydney, and he lived originally in the Chinatown, was in Harrington Street. And after he got married to Mum, he moved to Campbell Street. It's early century.
And what year was it that you were born in?
1925.
So you would remember the 1930s very well, wouldn't you?
Reasonably well, yes.
What was it like growing up at that time in Surry Hills?
Well, originally I was, they rejected, according to Dad, they rejected me on child endowment, even though I was born here.
Why was that?
Because you had to be, they classified us as a alien those days.
Because you were Chinese?
Our Dad was Chinese, although I was born here. But Dad didn't receive any child endowment or had a bonus in those days for children. It was all rejected on that account.
How did your family feel about that kind of thing?
Well, the doctor and the nurses wanted, couldn't accept it. And Dad told them that if they could get it, they were welcome to it. And we never got it at all.
And the doctors thought that you should have it?
Yes. But we never got it at all.
Yeah. And your mother was born in Australia, wasn't she?
Yes. She was born Darwin.
When did they get to be recognised as Australian citizens?
That was about 1950 when it was first permissible for aliens to be naturalised.
And what kind of people were classified as aliens prior to that?
Anybody who was born outside Australia. Because Mum was married to Dad and he was born in China, they classified as an alien.
And were you still an alien?
No.
That? No.
No, I was never considered an alien.
So your parents who never got the child endowment because they were considered to be alien?
Yes, but on part of Dad's part.
Right.
And my brother was wasn't considered for the Air Force during the war years.
Is that World War II?
Yes. In 1939 he went to enlist and they rejected him. So he joined the American Air Force.
Did he go to the States? Yeah.
Here he is here. I'll show you. That's why I brought it up for you.
Yeah.
That's him.
Oh gosh. And did he stay, has he lived in America since then or?
Yes. And that's him now. Believe it.
How many children were there in your family?
It's only both of us.
It must have broken your parents' heart when he left.
Yes, because he went to join the RAAF and they rejected him on ethnic grounds. Because that's how he joined the American 5th Air Force.
It sounds like it must have been very hard being Chinese in Australia at that time, that there was a lot of discrimination.
I never found it myself.
You didn't find it?
No. I've been fortunate that way.
Well, why do you think you haven't experienced it?
Because I mix with all Australians right through. That was the difference.
But presumably if you had lined up to go in the Air Force, they wouldn't have taken you either.
No. There's a lot of Australian-born were rejected on ethnic grounds in those days, early years.
On what sort of grounds?
Ethnic.
Ethnic grounds. What other nationalities experienced that kind of treatment?
I couldn't say on that. I know it was many Chinese had difficulties of joining the military forces early in the peace. Just like my cousin had difficulties becoming a first female school teacher.
First Chinese female?
Yes, Chinese female. Yeah, she was the first Chinese school teacher. And my cousin was the first minister of religion to be ordained in Australia by Reverend Walker.
What denomination's that? Is that
Presbyterian? Methodist, sorry. Methodist, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in your family, what was the effect of that institutional sort of discrimination?
It's more on the bureaucratic grounds than a normal Australian. That's what I found. Because
Well, how did your parents feel about that? Like, there was the White Australia policy that we had at that time?
Yes, that's right. But it was because of the White Australia policy. In many ways, my mother had to be re-registered as Australian in 50.
Sounds crazy.
Yes, because in 50, because Mum married Dad and he was born in China, she wasn't Australian anymore. And in 50, because of the occupation troops, married a lot of overseas women, Japanese and in Singapore and Hong Kong. To bring their wives back, the law was altered. And that allowed a lot of Chinese to be naturalised and bring their families out. Previous to that, they weren't allowed to bring their children out, their wives out or children out.
Right. So how did Chinese people get into Australia, given those...
Was in the early parts, they were permitted to come to Australia, but there was a Chinese, he was up in Townsville area, he had a polygamous marriage, and he had a lot of children, and that caused quite a lot of problems that way. It was publicised, and the government brought in this White Australian policy where females weren't allowed to come to Australia, only males.
And they were here to work?
Yes, and they had to return back home. That's why there's hardly any Chinese were settled here for that reason.
Well, what kind of house did you live in when you were growing up?
A terrace house.
And what street was that in?
Mary Street then.
And how long did you live there for?
Oh, up to 45.
It's a long time.
Then we moved to Commonwealth Street, the next street.
And what kind of a kid were you?
Just a normal kid.
Oh, yeah. Well, who were your friends?
Oh, those days, because I was limited in my fluency of English, it was just a few Chinese children.
What were their names?
Well, there was the G's, the Ongs, the Gums, Chans.
And were they long-established families in this area at that time?
Yes. A lot of them had shops or Chinese stores there.
What did your father do for a living?
Dad originally had a manufacturing company, when the depression set in, when he went into what's called hawking. Because in those days, if you wasn't an Australian citizen, you couldn't get any social security in those days. You had to be Australian citizen.
And what sort of manufacturing establishment did he have?
It was haberdashery, like making dresses.
Was that in Surry Hills?
Mm-hmm.
Whereabouts was the factory?
It was on the corner of Campbell and Foster Street.
Was it very big? Did he employ?
No, not I can remember of.
Can you remember it at all? No, no. Did your mum work at that place?
No,
When you were a kid, did your mother work?
no. She's always looked after us.
So, when was it that your father went hawking?
During the Depression years,
Would that have been 28 or more in the 30s?
in about 32, 30s, because when I think Lang brought in the Moratorium Act and the people didn't have to repay their debts, and they got him into trouble.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And did he go bust at that
Yes,
time?
because he couldn't collect these people. The people owed him money, and also the banks closed.
Well, when he went, where did he go? Did he do that in the metropolitan area, the hawking? Or
All over the metropolitan area.
And what was he selling?
Clothing.
From his factory?
No, that went bust then, and he went into hawking.
And did he, what sort of vehicle did he use for that?
Just used a what do you call it, Shanks pony.
And he carried the stuff in a suitcase?
Yes, that's right. It was quite fashionable in those days.
Yeah. And was it ladies' wear or men's clothes?
It was mixed.
That would have been a very hard way to make a living.
But during the Depression years, he couldn't get Social Security or anything like that. So
But nobody would have had any money to buy anything much.
They did. They had to buy a certain amount of clothing.
And so he would come home each evening?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a man would you say your father was? How would you describe him?
Very mild. Mild person. Good temper.
What about your mum?
Same.
Really?
Yes, really.
What sort of discipline was used in your house?
It's based on Chinese Confucianism.
Can you tell me a bit more about that? What do
It's
you mean?
more on family, elderly, patriarchal lines, you call it.
Were your,
Well,
were your grandparents living with you?
no, my grandparents, my mother's father died in Darwin, and the grandmother was in Hong Kong.
So, well, were you, in those Depression years, you would have been 10 in 1935.
Mm.
Were you expected to, with your, the demise of your father's business, were you expected to contribute to the family in any way?
I was too young then.
Did you have to go, like some kids went and scrounged bottles and sold them and did all sorts of things, and stole lead off the roofs of houses?
We weren't allowed out that much that way. We was kept mostly to the family. Where we went, the brother and I went as in the close neighbourhood, the friend's place.
So you weren't expected to work in any way?
Nah.
During those Depression years, was there enough food on the table?
Yes. We had enough food. We was fortunate that way.
What about other families in Surry Hills? How did the other people survive?
I couldn't say, actually. But you see, but the other children, there's a lot about shoes, and they were picking up bottles, going around that way. Bottles, old bags for the bottle load used to come around, drink bottles.
But you didn't have to do that?
No, I didn't have to do that. All we had to do is get firewood for the copper.
And where would you get that from?
From the factories. There's plenty of factories around. The factory boxes and the fruit shop.
And people were friendly to you as kids going around there looking for a bit of wood and what have you?
Yes. It's a multicultural neighbourhood. Outside you had Greeks, Italians, Australians, Irish, Maltese.
This is in the 30s?
Mm-hmm.
And did people mix together very much?
Well, children did. Yes, at school, once you went to school, you knew each other.
And where did you go to school?
Crown Street.
The public school there?
Yes.
And how many other Chinese kids were in the class that's there?
One.
You were the only kid?
Yes, only one in my class.
And were the other kids okay to you? How?
Yes. Children mix well. In fact, Sir Nick Shady was one of my schoolmates. He went to Crown Street.
Oh. Do you know him still?
Yes. And one of the little Greek boy, turned out as a Deputy Lord Mayor of Town Hall.
And who was that?
Jack Kalpis.
And did you retain friendships from your childhood,
Yes.
school days through into your adult years?
Yes.
Did they move away from the area? Like you would be unusual in having stayed here all your life.
Because attachment to it, because parents lived here and children grew up, so we never bothered. Just a general sentiment, just like a good few of us, a sentiment more than anything else. If it was like a family home, we never moved out of it.
In your family, I've asked about the discipline, but when you were naughty, if you did something you weren't supposed to do, what would happen?
You get the feather duster in those days, yes.
And who would administer this?
Mostly mother.
So your mother was mostly the one who would have to do the...
Yes, because Dad was out.
Did he work long hours?
Oh, usually home for tea every night.
Is that when you had your main meal? And what would...
Breakfast and tea.
In the main meal of the day, what would be a normal sort of main meal that you would have?
Just like Chinese meals, rice, meat, fish.
And there was always plenty to eat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what did your family do for fun? As a family, when you had some time off, what would you...
We go to picnics, swimming.
And whereabouts would you go to?
We used to go to Bronte or Clovelly, Nielsen Park.
To catch a tram there?
Yes. Penny to go there in those days.
Sounds pretty
children,
good.
yeah, I know that.
Yeah. Did your mum go swimming too, or was it just the kids?
The kids, yeah, and their cousins and everybody. The whole family would go with cousins. My aunties would go in one family.
How many of you would there have been?
Oh, six, seven of us, children.
And then the adults as well?
Mm-hmm.
And did the adults get in the water, or was it just the children?
Yes, my cousins, yes, the older cousins. Mm-hmm.
What about your dad and mum?
No, Dad and Mum wouldn't.
Yeah. What about family holidays? Did you ever have any?
Yes, we'd go up to Brisbane, sort of one of my mother's girlfriend's place. They grew up together.
Were most of your parents' friends, were they from the Chinese community, or?
No, we had some from the Scottish community. Was very close to Dad.
Scottish?
Yes. a man called Mackey. He was the chief inspector of Randwick Council, and his family was very close to Dad.
And you would socialise?
Yes.
And how did your dad meet him?
He couldn't say. He's a very, very old friend. In fact, he was my friend, and he took me around when I grew older.
So the family experience discrimination? It was more bureaucratic and institutional.
Yes, ban the ordinary Australian. I never met it.
You know how now sometimes you see graffiti up Asians out and all that sort of stuff from the National Front?
Never around here. Never.
It'd be around here now sometimes, wouldn't it? Or
No, I never.
no. I don't know. You just see it. I don't know where one sees it, but you do see it. But you never, in those days, did you ever experience that?
No, I never experienced it.
I can't remember. Oh, we were talking about discrimination, but you didn't experience anything like
experience. Only the bureaucratic part.
that. What about other kids' parents?
No, I never experienced it.
Okay. In the evenings, oh no, we were talking about, did your family go on holidays? That's right,
Yes.
you said Brisbane. Okay, sorry, I'm losing track. In the evenings, when your dad came home and the family was relaxing, what would the family do in the evening? I mean, everybody watches TV these days.
No TV in those days.
Yeah.
Either for the other children, we played to dusk, playing marbles or riding a scooter. The kids would play hopscotch and rope skipping just like normal children.
Is that just out the front?
Out the front, yes.
And were you allowed to play in the street?
Yes. Cricket.
Was it dangerous?
No, it wasn't dangerous. It was very tranquil compared to today. You could sit out the front door, the door open. You wouldn't be bothered, not like today's. You get the drunks and you gotta lock the door all the time.
And to what time would you have to be in, say in the evening?
Tea time.
Tea time.
That was the end, yes.
And so after tea, what would the family do?
Well, the children, well, brother and I would do our homework and then to bed. There was no radios early in the piece, or wirelesses. Late on we'd listen to wireless.
And
bed. Bed by 7.
Did you have toys that much?
Yes.
What were the favourite toys of that time?
Beetle wind-ups. The Japanese wind-ups.
What, they were key ones?
Yeah, little key trains and all that.
And what about books?
Books, comics. We used to get comics at, say, tuppence, penny halfpenny in those days, tuppence, comics.
And what were some of your favourites?
Well, I forget now, they were chums, I think, in those days. You get British comic. Some come from England, were printed in England. Some were from America, comic books.
And is that would most kids would be reading comics?
Yes.
And did they swap them and?
Yes, all that. Cigarette cards. Kids. One stage, the parents would keep cigarette cards because you could swap them for presents like cameras. Just like you go shopping, you get green coupons, and you could go into town and you could swap them, redeem them for whatever you like. Depends on how many you had. You went to the shop.
Was this in the 30s?
Had a green coupon, was in Castlereagh Street, opposite Mark Foy's. That's in the 30s.
In the neighbourhood, what did most kids' parents do for a living?
They couldn't say that one. A lot of them worked in the factories close by. We had, you had silk knit, They were mostly in the dressmaking and that.
And were the women mostly working?
No. In those days, only what I can recall, most of it was unfashionable for women to work those days.
Even in the 30s?
Mm-hmm. It was a reflection. If your wives worked in those days, they stayed home with the children.
Can you describe your mother's working day at home? What was that like?
We'll be looking after, preparing our meals, looking after us, and just dusting the house, going shopping.
What time would she get up?
She'd get up about 7 to get us ready for school, get breakfast for Dad, and we all have breakfast together.
Was it a cooked breakfast?
Yes.
What would you have?
Rice, or sometimes European ones like bacon and eggs, that way.
And you'd take sandwiches to school?
Yes. Or we come home.
You could come home for lunch?
Yes.
And what would you have for lunch when you came home?
Or just like bread and egg and just like ordinary. That's to make sure we didn't get into any mischief of the other children, so we came home for lunch mostly.
Were you able to bring your friends home?
Yes.
And they were always welcome?
Yes.
What was the political preferences of your parents? Were they Labor or I don't think the Liberal Party was formed in those times. What?
I remember Dad didn't start to vote until he was in the 50s.
Oh, that's right.
Or Mother wasn't eligible.
Yeah, but were they politically interested in what was going on? I mean, what about when the Depression and the...
Well, that upset a lot of Chinese that time. Because of the moratorium and the closing of the banks.
So, so was there much talk of politics in your house?
No. It didn't affect us in any way.
Because you never had a choice?
I was too young.
You know, the Depression experience of your father when he had to go out hawking, you know, door to door, which must have been very difficult. How did that affect him?
It's a matter of survival, because you couldn't get Social Security, and the whole Chinese population, or the majority, were former migrants or immigrants classified as aliens, so they had to look the best they could. A lot of them worked in the nearby markets, was in Haymarket. They worked there, and they couldn't get no Social Security, so they usually help in this local stores and had their meals there.
Did the Chinese community look after each other?
They had to in those days because they had individual little clubs, associations, which attended to them.
So if somebody got into trouble, there'd be support there?
And anybody got sick, they were sent back to China. All those that passed away, the bones were sent back to ancestral grounds. After 7 years, you were allowed to exhume, and the bones were cleaned up and sent back to their families in China.
So there were a lot of links to the families in China, even though people had been out here for a long, long time. There were still strong ties, is that right?
Yes, because they couldn't bring them out. The government wouldn't let them bring them out, so they had to go back periodically to see their wives and children.
Well, you know, this Depression experience, like, your father, like, he had to do that work, and did it affect him as a person? That's what I'm saying. Like, Did he feel embittered by that experience?
No, we saw a lot of people were worse off. He never affected him that way because he always managed to manage.
How would you describe Surry Hills, say, in the 1930s, or your immediate neighbourhood? Where were you by the 1930s? You were in Commonwealth Street?
No, Mary Street.
Mary Street.
Mm-hmm.
Was it what was that like then? Who were the people living there?
Oh, in my old locality is all Chinese. That was the Chinatown. The whole lot was the Chinatown in those days because it was close to the markets, the city markets. The original market was in Queen Victoria, and they moved to Haymarket, and all the Chinese that worked in the markets lived nearby, which is in Surry Hills.
And so it was mostly a residential area, or were there factories around the place?
There was a few factories. You had Murdoch's.
What did they make?
Murdoch's department stores. Remember where Walton is?
So there was Murdoch's, which had department stores.
Yes, in Park Street. Jones Brothers. You had.
What were Jones Brothers?
They made hats where the present CIB building is. And you had furrers. And used to kill rabbits and get the rabbits' fur to make hats for Cuba up the street. Mm-hmm.
Can you remember any others?
Was Paramount Pictures.
What were they doing?
They were the agents for the picture shows. Paramount, the picture people.
Was it a safe neighbourhood in the 30s? Was it safe for you?
Yes, we were safe in one way because we had the two-up school. It was close by, it was Tomo's, and they had cockatoos and made sure that none of the neighbourhood would get into trouble. They used to escort anybody who come home late, and they would escort you home, make sure you wasn't bothered, because
by any of the patrons?
Because he would bring the police around to us, so they looked after us.
And who was Tomo?
Tomo, we couldn't say, because we used to see Jack Davey and Bob Twine used to go there in the old days, yes, all the celebrities.
Really?
Police couldn't said they didn't exist, but we knew existed.
And how many people would go there to play two-up?
Couldn't say. I didn't. You used to see them go in.
And where did they hold it?
I used to be in Reservoir Street, or I had a couple of places. I used to go through one house to the other house to confuse the police and that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you had the jockeys. The jockeys used to go to Dobson's Bath. It was in Reservoir Street. They used to go and get the sauna, all the main jockeys. It was quite safe. Nobody was bothered. You could go late night shopping later on when night shopping goes. You could come home. Nobody would bother us.
And the cockatoos would know all the locals, and you would know them, and they'd make sure everyone was looked after.
Yes. Yes. Because they didn't like to see any bother any of their patrons, so they looked after everybody.
But I've heard all these terrible things about razor gangs in Surry Hills.
Nah, not down where we lived. Not even drunks.
Well, how come you didn't have any drunks?
No. Because at 6 o'clock we used to, the children, if they were later, the police used to send them home. If they were so late and you was a bit later, the police, they told me, used to take them home, knock the parents and ask the parents why were children out so late in those days? Which they don't do today.
Well, what about, I keep hearing about people like these women, Tilly Devine and Kate Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Who were they?
Only thing we heard about is they had sly grog shops.
And that was it?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know them?
No.
You know, what was it like?
The only one we knew was B. Miles. She used to run around.
Yes?
You used to see her jumping off trams or sitting on the doorstep.
On your doorstep?
No, down the street, just off Elizabeth Street, where she used to jump on off trams. She'd been jumping off trams for donkey years.
What did you think of her?
She was harmless. She never bothered anybody. All she used to do is jump on the trams. And they were toast racks in those days. She can jump off better than conductors.
Some people were scared of her.
No. Only time she, later in life, I knocked it a couple of times, she wanted, what was it, 50 cents? 5 shillings to 2 shillings for her to quote Shakespeare.
Did you give it to her?
No, I never wanted quotations, so I never have to pay it. But she never bothered you. I never saw her drunk, even.
She wasn't a drunk, was she?
No, she wasn't a drunk.
What smells can you remember from Surry Hills in the say the 30s, the early 30s? What smells do you associate with your neighbourhood?
It wasn't. I didn't.
Nice smells, they can be.
No, I couldn't.
You can't remember any.
No, because we didn't have many cars in those days.
Yeah.
Only you had the horse and cart. You had the milk cart, the ice cart, and there was the garbage cart, or horse-drawn in those days.
Well, did you have sewage connected?
Yes.
You had sewage.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have hot running water in your house?
No.
Cold water, though?
Cold water. And we had the copper. Everybody had a copper in those days for washing.
And was the bathroom in the laundry where you'd wash? Would you? Also?
No, we had a separate bathroom.
What sounds can you remember when you go back? If you close your eyes and think of what you can hear in the 30s, what sounds do you associate with the neighbourhood?
We had to hear the train and the trams. That's all.
Can you remember any big events of your childhood? Any, I don't know, particular celebrations or?
The sesquicentenaries.
Yeah.
Were at the showground we had.
Well, what did they do then?
The school, we celebrate the sesquicentenary. The Queen came. We went out to the showground for school. Got a medal given. Had a medal given.
A medal?
Yeah. And also had lunch, milk, fruit. Had to spend a day there. The Queen came.
Was that all the kids in the city of Sydney had that?
Yes. And when the Duke of, Duke of York came 1 year.
That must have been about 35 or something, I'm not sure. When it was.
He came twice. Later on he came as the governor. He was the governor. Governor General.
Oh. Well, in a year, for a kid, what about, did you celebrate, are your family Christian? Or were they,
Half of each we had.
what were, oh that's right, a Presbyterian. And what was the other half?
Confucius, mostly.
And what were you raised as?
I was raised in the Church of England. The girl next door took me Church of England school, Sunday school, so I went to Church of England church.
And so did your family celebrate Christmas?
Yes.
And, well, what was the big event of the year? Was Christmas big, or birthdays, or Easter, or
We
some?
used to have Christmas, New Year's Eve, Empire Day, because we had our bonfires.
Where would you have the bonfire?
The children used to have it in the middle of the street. Yes, it was tolerated in those days.
No problem from the police?
No, I used to stand around and watch to make sure it didn't get any bigger.
What about Chinese New Year?
Yes, we still had our cracker night.
And would there be other Chinese feasts, wouldn't there?
Not a fake.
Just the New Year you celebrated?
Yes.
At your house, were there people coming and going? Did you have a lot of did you have other people from the Chinese community coming there? Was it a meeting place or?
Not at our place, but there was some close handy in those days. In fact, one of the prominent little boys I used to play was Victor Chan.
Oh, really?
Yes, he lived in Reservoir Street. He lived, when he first came from China, he lived with his grandfather. He did, for his early schooling years, he went up to Darlinghurst. He grew up and played with him.
Were there were members of the Chinese community trying to get to work to greater acceptance and bureaucratic recognition of their status here as Australians?
No, there was no political involvement in those days.
Was that a sort of a conscious decision that it was better to keep quiet and rather than make make waves sort of thing?
Because a lot of them, they didn't have their families here, so they were going back intermittently to China, so that was a lot of reason behind it.
When that policy changed, when they could bring their family out, did the community become more sort of Australian oriented?
Well, earlier they were more accepted after the 50s because a lot of the people diversified. Instead of being in the market gardens, they went into the catering trade. They started restaurants and that. Everybody moved out.
Yeah, when did that period of change come about, when people started to move out of Surry Hills?
That happened about 50, when they started to bring their families in, and just like everybody else, they had money there, and they started to start restaurants, and they brought their families in, and Communist China come in the bin, so they started to branch out. They started to buy their own homes then.
Yeah, what was the feeling in the community here with the conflict? I mean, in the 30s there was the war with Japan,
yes,
and the Japanese occupied Manchuria and all that. Yeah, they had years of conflict, and then you had the revolutionary conflict, and I think Chiang Kai-shek was thrown out to Taiwan. And whose side were people on?
Well, they weren't on anybody's side, actually, because early in the piece, the KMT or Chiang Kai-shek lot, they run war bonds, and people lost a lot of money because they started to change currency. They wouldn't redeem the bonds. A lot of the old folks got caught with the bond. When the communists come in, and they lost what they had in China, because a lot of them, as you know, had their families over there. They weren't allowed to bring them in, and
that would have split some families permanently then, because even if the Australians had let them in, was the communist government in China likely to let them out?
Some got out, but they got out because they earned their money overseas. They had homes there, but everything they had was nationalised, so it made them a bit bitter. So either side was...
Were they free to leave China?
No.
Under Mao?
No. They weren't.
They weren't. So how did people manage to get away?
They didn't. Only some got away.
So families would have been split virtually forever, almost, well, until now.
Yes. They have loosened up a lot considerably now. But there's a lot of families here since. But it has made a difference in the population here because there's more Chinese females here than there ever has been previously, because up to 50 was more geriatrics, and then it was decimated actually.
Why?
They were old. They couldn't, during the war years, they couldn't go back to China. There was nobody coming out. So the older were getting older and passing away. In the end, the communists got in. The people were getting buried out Rookwood, and they weren't sending the bodies home. So Rookwood cemetery was getting filled up. And nobody's going home now. Like, they're not sending bodies back like previously.
What effect did the communists coming to power in China have on the community here?
Well, it's made them more permanent. They call it home now because they were permitted to bring their families and out, and they were settled down. They purchased their home, which they couldn't purchase previously. They couldn't be naturalised previously. But if you were to become Australian, you couldn't buy a home.
You couldn't buy a home unless you were Australian.
Yeah, that's right. In the old days, you couldn't own a hotel or news agents unless you're Australian citizen.
Well, who are some of the local characters? We're talking about the 30s now. In the community, who are some people that are particularly memorable in your childhood? Say.
Well, there's my old school teacher, Professor Fred Chong, old family friend. And you got Victor Cheng. There's Victor Cheng.
But not necessarily famous people, just ordinary people in the community who you knew as a kid who might have been associates of your father or people, even people that you were meant to keep away from. I mean, they don't have to be, who are the characters in the area?
Oh, if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. My friend was a Scotchman.
Yeah.
He used to take me around, yes, that was my moment. Every time it was a holiday, he used to take me to court, to listen to court, or take me down to the park and play chess or play drafts with his family.
Right.
So I was around with Australian sports.
And did your parents sort of have that as a policy?
No, it's just he's been friends with this Scotch friend for donkey years before I was born. They remained.
Is your father still alive?
No, he passed away.
Is he buried at Rookwood?
Yes, like mother. And brother being away made a difference.
How did your brother left? How old was he when he left?
About 19.
Yeah.
That's when he went to enlist in the Air Force.
And was he was obviously. Can you remember when he came back and was told, and said, well, he'd been rejected on the basis that he was Chinese?
I can.
And what was the feeling then?
Well, he was very bitter then because this was in 1939. The Japanese war hadn't started. It was only with the German war then when he went to enlist. Germany, and he was turned down. And later on, he just joined the American Air Force.
And he's lived in America ever since?
No, he's been overseas most of the time.
Oh, yes.
He served right through the Pacific Theatre when it was the occupation of Japan, when Korean War. Then after retiring, he joined the State Department as a career foreign service officer, and he's served around the world from there.
Sounds like a good life.
Oh no, he was the last one to get out of Vietnam. When the embassy fell in Saigon.
He was the last one out?
Yes, one of the last.
Well, at least he got out.
Yes, and he's joined the United Nations as a consultant. And in between that is the Deputy Sheriff of Tucson.
As a child, were you happy? Was it a happy childhood?
Yes, because it was more family involvement. Nobody had a TV or sit in front of TV, and it's more a neighbourhood. Everybody visited each other or sit out the front door, and everybody, children would play, and the elders would just sit out the front door to cool down and talk.
And that would be mostly amongst the other Chinese neighbours in your
No.
street? Oh, I thought you said that where you lived it was all Chinese.
But later on there's Australians, and
When was that it became more mixed?
when we moved to Commonwealth Street.
Oh, and Commonwealth Street
Yes.
was mixed, and Mary Street was mostly Chinese.
Yes.
Okay, what's your happiest memory? What's your happiest memory from your childhood? It's a hard one.
Well, just going with the children and that. And we used to be more happy that way because there's more of a family involvement. The elders would be involved, the children would be involved, we'd go to each other's and play.
What's your saddest memory?
Brother going away, parents passing away.
How did it affect your mother when your brother left, Arthur left?
Oh, she was upset, worried about him. When the Japanese, when the, what do you call it, there was a communist riots in Hong Kong, that actually killed her.
Really?
Heart attack. She worried about her sister.
When was that?
That was back in 50, I think, 50 or something. 50 or...
What was the social focus of Surry Hills? You know, if there was a place that you said where people went to talk and have a yak and what have you, you know, was there any place that was where you could go and meet people or look at people or walk around? You know, was there a place that was a social focus?
Well, I was oddity.
You were?
Even
Why were you the oddity?
because I was a Mason. I went to Masonic lodges all the time.
Did you?
Yes.
Well, that was when you were older. What about when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, where Dad went, we went like out on family outings, not with my cousins and that, mostly.
But was there any sort of community centre or anything like that?
No, there's only one, was the late, they call it late weird in the old days. Something good, where all the Chinese, it was a social club.
Yeah.
They had dances, picnics. Like on New Year's Eve, they'll hire a launch, go to one of the islands in the harbour, have dances, but nothing else.
Well, what about sort of not just the Chinese, other places where all the different, from all the different racial groups in Surry Hills? Before you mentioned there were Greeks and Maltese and Australia.
Well, you only
Aussies.
knew them socially from
Right.
school, but
Right.
there was no general meeting that way.
Okay.
But there were dialect clubs, but they called clansmen clubs.
What's that?
Chinese clans, different clans or different dialects of villages had their own association, which attended to the own clans' fairs.
And would they provide social welfare sort of services?
Yes, that's the ones that would exhume bodies to send back to their ancestral grounds, or anybody was sick, attend to the welfare. If they were poor and in poor health and not expected to live, they would send them back to China to their own grounds, so be buried in their home family grounds.
Was it sort of the ambition, if you like, in the 30s for Chinese people to die in China?
To return, yes. And so everybody was sent back. That's why Rookwood is virtually emptied in those days.
Yeah. When you were with your friends, how far were you allowed to roam?
To picture show and backs in those days.
Where would you go to the pictures?
In town, we go to, there's plenty of pictures in those days. You had the State, Embassy, Prince Edward, Mayfair, Century, Civic, Lyric, Empire, all those.
And did you go very often to the movies?
Occasionally. It used to be only 6 months in those days.
And you could afford it in the 30s?
Yes, the parents used to let us go occasionally for cousins. It used to be only a penny for ice cream in those days. Penny or...
Can you remember any adventures that you had with your friends and your cousins as a kid?
No. We just a normal go to picnic, because we always went as a family.
Sounds like you were very good.
Well, we was very well supervised, but in that way we couldn't get into any bother.
All right. And what was your school experience like? What was it like at school? Were you happy there?
Yes.
Were you good at school?
Reasonably.
Any teachers that you particularly remember?
Oh, only Professor Chong.
And what did he teach you?
He taught me maths.
At what school?
He taught me at Central Tech, and also he taught me when he's at Crown Street as he was a student teacher when he first. He come to he started Dean of Maths in the Macquarie in the end.
Oh, him. Oh, I went there.
And he's the one who used to set the school certificate, leaving in the old days, the maths one. He's the one who gave me a lecture. He said, I'm a family friend, and I'm going to be twice as hard on you and anybody else to make sure I didn't step out of a line.
And did you do well?
Yes, he made sure.
Yeah, that's good. Were there many Aboriginal people around this area?
No. They were mostly out La Perouse. They were all situated La Perouse. They had little humpies out in those days.
And what about Redfern?
No.
Did you go down to Redfern much at all?
No.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say? I can't... I'm out of questions.
I know. No, only about how we was disappointed about Brother's business being turned.
Yes. Must have been terrible. Okay. Thank you very much.
I tell you, it was Tuesday.